The truck came out of nowhere. One moment, Sahira was walking along the empty highway, her footsteps echoing in the cold night air. The next, twin headlights blazed toward her like the eyes of some metal beast. She tried to dive aside, but she was too slow, too tired from days of running, too weak from the wounds that hadn't healed properly. The impact hit her like a sledgehammer. Metal met flesh with a sickening crunch. Her body flew through the air, spinning like a broken doll before, crashing onto the rough asphalt. The truck never even slowed down. It roared past her, its red taillights growing smaller and smaller until they disappeared completely into the darkness. All that remained was the sharp smell of burnt rubber hanging in the air and the warm, sticky feeling of blood soaking into the cold road beneath her. Sahira lay there, unable to move. Each breath felt like fire in her chest. Her body refused to listen to her commands. Arms wouldn't lift, legs wouldn't bend. Every nerve in her body screamed in pain. But she had survived worse than this. Much worse. The crash had broken something. Inside her, she could feel it. But she could also feel the familiar, crawling warmth of her cells slowly putting themselves back together. It was painful and much slower than usual. But it was working. Her body was trying to heal itself, piece by piece. The problem was, it would take time. Time she might not have. A deep cut ran from her shoulder all the way down to her ribs. Dark blood pooled beneath her, spreading across the cracked road like spilled paint. It wasn't the worst injury she'd ever had, but it was bad enough to make her weak, bad enough to leave her helpless, and she couldn't afford to be helpless. Not here. Not on this strange world. She tilted her head back and stared up at the sky. It stretched above her like a black canvas, but everything was wrong. The stars were in the wrong places. The constellations made no sense. Even the air felt different, thick and heavy, filled with the distant smell of oil and metal. Nothing like the clean, sharp wind of her home planet. This wasn't where she belonged. She was never supposed to be here, but here she was, abandoned. And alone. The thought hit her harder than the truck had. A cold, sharp pain stabbed through her chest. Colder than the night air. Colder than the blood on the road. She had known betrayal before. She had lived with it long enough to build walls around her heart, to make herself strong against it. But this was different. This wasn't just betrayal. This was abandonment of the cruelest kind. They had thrown her away like she was nothing. Like she was garbage. Like all the years of service. All the battles she had fought. All the blood she had spilled for them. None of it mattered. She should have seen it coming. Should have known better than to trust anyone. A sound made her freeze. Footsteps. Every muscle in Sahira's body tensed, coiling like a spring ready to snap. What little strength she had left gathered itself, preparing for a fight. If they had come back to finish the job, she wouldn't go down easy. The footsteps were uneven, heavy boots crunching on gravel. Slow and careful, not rushed, not like the trained, silent movements of the soldiers who had betrayed her. This was something else. Someone else. She forced her eyes open, blinking against the pain. A man stood over her, his shape dark against the dim glow of a streetlight. He was tall with broad shoulders. A dark jacket hung loose over his lean frame. His posture was tired, but not threatening. His face was mostly hidden in shadow, but she could make out short black hair, sharp features, and a deep frown between his eyebrows. For a long moment he just stood there, staring down at her. Then he spoke, his voice rough and low, with something that wasn't quite fear, but wasn't far from it either. Well, hell, that's not something you see every day. Sahira's fingers twitched, but her muscles betrayed her. Her body was still too sluggish from the crash. Move, she commanded herself. Get up. Fight. But she couldn't. She was trapped in her own broken body. The man crouched down beside her, his eyes scanning over her injuries. His gaze lingered on the strange shimmer of her blue skin, the unusual color of her blood. He let out a long breath, barely audible. Okay, he muttered to himself. Definitely not what I was expecting to find tonight. Sahira's throat burned as she forced out a single word. Human. It wasn't a question. It was a statement, filled with something close to disgust. The man let out a short laugh. Yeah, last time I checked. His gaze flicked back to her wound. You're in pretty bad shape. She swallowed against the dryness in her throat, forcing steel into her voice despite the pain. Leave me. Not happening. He started to reach for her. An instinct took over. Sahira flinched violently, pain flaring through her entire body at the sudden movement. The man stopped immediately, raising his hands with palms open, a gesture of peace. Easy, he said, his tone calmer now, more measured. I'm not here to hurt you. She didn't believe him. She didn't believe anyone anymore. But she was helpless. If he wanted to hurt her, there was nothing she could do to stop him. He reached out again, slower this time, his fingers barely brushing against her arm as he examined the wound. The moment his skin touched hers, something strange happened. Heat. Not just the warmth from his body, but something deeper. Something that seemed to flow between them like electricity. It wasn't just touch, it was connection. Something beneath the skin. Something primal and powerful. Sahira sucked in a sharp breath. So did he? The man's eyebrows drew together. For just a moment, his fingers curled slightly, as if he was testing the sensation. Then, just as quickly, he pulled his hand back, shaking his head like he was trying to clear fog from his mind. What the hell was that? He muttered, more to himself than to her. Sahira's heart pounded. She had felt it too, felt something flow. Through him, into her. It was impossible. It didn't make sense. She shoved the thought away. Buried it deep. Do not touch me, she said through gritted teeth. His expression hardened. Look, you can yell at me later. But right now, you're bleeding out on the damn road. Either you let me help or you die here. Your choice. She gritted her teeth, pride, warring with necessity. I heal, she ground out. Faster than you, I will survive. The man scoffed. Yeah? And how long is that going to take? She didn't answer because she didn't know. Her body was sluggish, her usual rapid healing failing. Either the injuries were too severe, or something about this world was slowing the process. It wasn't working like it should, and she hated not knowing why. The man sighed, running a hand through his hair. All right, let's make this simple. You don't trust me. I get it. But right now, your options are me. He jabbed a thumb at his chest, or whatever else is out here in the middle of the night. She hated that he was right. Sahira clenched her jaw. I do not need your help. He gave her a dry look. Yeah? Then why are you still lying on the ground? She scowled, but it was a weak effort. Her limbs refused to hold her weight. Her body was betraying her again, and she couldn't fight him. She couldn't even move. He knew it too. Thought so, he muttered, shifting closer. Before she could protest, he slipped one arm around her back, another under her legs, and lifted her up effortlessly. Sahira hated the sound that escaped her throat, a sharp intake of breath that was part pain, part something else she refused. To acknowledge he was warm. Too warm. She stiffened against him, her pride shrieking in protest. Relax, he muttered, adjusting his grip as he carried her toward a truck waiting nearby. It's not like I want to be doing this either. She should fight him, should resist. Instead, she let her head rest against his chest. Just for a moment. Just until she could stand on her own again. She told herself. It was only necessity. Nothing more. Nothing more at all. The truck's engine growled like a wild animal as it tore down the empty highway. Its headlights carved a narrow path through the darkness, the only light for miles. Axel kept one hand on the steering wheel, the other tapping restlessly against his thigh. His knuckles were white from gripping too tight, tension crawling up his spine like a living thing. The woman Zahira, though she hadn't offered her name, was slumped against the passenger seat, breathing shallow and slow. Her body was still, but Axel didn't trust stillness. Not after what he'd seen. She shouldn't even be conscious after getting hit by a truck like that, let alone gripping the edge of her seat with white-knuckled stubbornness. He stole a glance at her. The streetlight back there hadn't done her justice. Up close, she was something else entirely. Her skin was a deep, iridescent blue that seemed to shift and change with every breath. It caught the glow from the dashboard in a way that made it seem alive, like it was lit from within. Long, dark hair, tangled and damp with blood, spilled over her shoulders. Her eyes, sharp, alien, and completely unreadable, were locked on him, watching his every move. Axel cleared his throat. You're not going to pass out on me, are you? Zahira's fingers twitched, gripping the armrest even tighter. I will recover. He didn't miss the slight tremor in her voice, the way she was holding herself together through sheer force of will. It was almost impressive. Almost. Axel scoffed. Yeah, sure. You look great. Definitely not about to bleed all over my truck. Her jaw tightened. If I were going to die, I would not do so in your vehicle. Well, that's reassuring. A sharp gust of wind rattled the truck's frame. The road stretched out ahead, dark and empty, with nothing but endless trees on either side. Then, in the rearview mirror, he saw them. Headlights. Axel's gut went cold. He flicked his gaze back to the road, his hands tightening on the wheel. Tell me you're not being hunted, he said. Zahira didn't answer. Axel exhaled sharply. Right. Stupid. Question. The headlights behind them multiplied. 2 cars. No, 3. All of them closing in fast. He gritted his teeth. I'm guessing those aren't your friends. Zahira shifted in her seat, wincing as she tried to straighten up. They will not. Let me leave. Axel didn't bother asking why. It didn't matter. They were in trouble, and whatever mess she was tangled up in, he was part of it now too. He pressed down on the gas pedal. The truck roared forward, tires biting into the pavement. The pursuing cars followed, their engines snarling in the night. Tensed beside him, her fingers twitching like she wanted to do something, anything, but was too weak to move. Axel kept his eyes on the road. You got any fancy alien tricks up your sleeve? No. Great. He shifted gears, the engine whining as they picked up speed. Guess we're doing this the old-fashioned way. The truck hit a sharp curve, and Axel took it hard, tires skidding across the asphalt before straightening out. The pursuers stayed on them, engines snarling, moving too fast and too controlled. Whoever they weren't just some random thugs. Axel exhaled through his teeth. I hate nights like this. One of the cars surged forward, pulling up alongside them. The window rolled down, and the glint of a weapon caught the light. Down, Axel barked. Zahira barely had time to react before the first shot rang out. Glass exploded everywhere. The side mirror shattered, shards spraying across the dashboard. Axel swerved hard, gripping the wheel as the truck veered dangerously toward the guardrail. Sahira sucked in a sharp breath, her body coiling like she was ready to fight, but she was too weak, still struggling just to keep herself upright. Axel clenched his jaw. Fine. He'd handle it. Another car came up on the other side. More gunfire. Bullets pinged off the truck's metal frame. Axel's fingers tightened on the wheel. All right, screw this. He jerked the truck hard to the left. The impact sent the nearest car spinning, tires shrieking as it veered off the road, smashing through the guardrail before vanishing into the trees below. One down. The others weren't deterred. Sahira was watching him now, her eyes narrow with something that might have been surprise. You are reckless. Yeah, well, I don't like getting shot at. One of the remaining cars accelerated, ramming into the back of the truck. The whole vehicle lurched forward, metal groaning in protest. Axel growled. That's it. Up ahead, the road dipped, leading into a narrow, winding stretch of forest. Thick trees, rough terrain, the kind of place that made it impossible for multiple cars to chase side by side. A plan formed in his mind. A stupid one, but the best he had. He glanced at Sahira. Hold on. She didn't argue. Axel yanked the wheel hard, veering off the main road and straight into the trees. Branches scraped against the truck's sides, the undercarriage groaning as they bounced over uneven terrain. The first car followed. The second hesitated. Axel grinned. He spotted what he was looking for. A fallen tree, thick and heavy, balanced precariously on the incline above the path. Just waiting for the right push. Axel floored the gas pedal. The truck shot forward, just barely making it under the massive log. A second later, the car behind them wasn't so lucky. With a thunderous crack, the tree gave way, crashing down in an explosion of splintered wood and crushed metal. Axel let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. Silence. The second car had stopped. Their last pursuer wasn't stupid enough to keep chasing them into unfamiliar terrain. Axel didn't slow down until they were deep enough into the woods that no one would follow. Only then did he ease off the gas, rolling to a stop beneath the thick canopy of trees. The engine ticked softly as it cooled. For a long moment neither of them spoke. Then Sahira exhaled, her voice low. That was primitive. Axel huffed a laugh, running a hand through his hair. Yeah, well, primitive works. She studied him, her expression unreadable. You're not like the others. He raised an eyebrow. Other? Humans? She hesitated, then said quietly, the ones I have met. There was something heavy in her tone, something dark that he didn't push. Not yet. Instead, he leaned back, rubbing a hand over his face. So, you want to tell me who the hell those guys were? Sahira looked away. Not yet. Figures. Axel sighed. All right. Then at least tell me where I'm supposed to drop you off. Silence. Sahira turned back to him, meeting his gaze. Something guarded and uncertain flickered in her expression. I have nowhere to go, she said quietly. Axel stared at her. Against his better judgment, he realized he believed her. The truck rumbled to a stop deep in the woods, its headlights cutting weak beams through the thick night fog. The scent of damp earth filled the air, mixing with the lingering smell of burnt rubber and oil from their wild escape. The silence that followed felt heavier than it should have, pressing down on Axel's chest like a weight. For the first time since the chase began, they weren't being followed. At least not yet. Axel let out a slow breath, resting his hands on the steering wheel. His knuckles were stiff and sore from gripping it so hard. Adrenaline still pumped through his veins, making his heart race. but the immediate danger had passed. Now came the part he wasn't sure he was ready for. He turned to look at the passenger seat. Sahira hadn't moved much. She was still slumped against the seat, breathing shallow but steady. Her eyes were open though, watching him with that same unreadable expression. The glow from the dashboard traced the sharp lines of her face, highlighting the sheen of sweat on her skin and the way her dark hair stuck to her forehead. She was in pain. He could see it in the tightness around her mouth, the stiffness in her shoulders. But she wasn't making a sound. Not a single complaint or whimper. Axel ran a hand down his face, exhaling sharply. "All right, we're safe for now." Sahira's fingers twitched slightly, as if she wanted to move but wasn't sure she could. When she finally spoke, her voice was low and strained. "Where are we?" Axel nodded toward the darkness ahead, where the outline of a small building was barely visible through the trees. "An old hunting lodge. A place I use when I don't want to be found." He didn't give her time to argue. He pushed open his door, the truck groaning as he stepped out. The night air bit against his skin, cold and sharp. He moved quickly, circling around to the passenger side and yanking the door open. Sahira stiffened. Axel didn't miss the way her hands curled into fists, as if she expected him to attack. The realization settled uncomfortably in his chest. "Relax," he muttered. "I'm not going to hurt you." She didn't respond immediately. When she did speak, her words were soft, but they hit him like a hammer. "I was not supposed to survive." Axel straightened up, frowning. "What do you mean?" Sahira exhaled slowly, deliberately. "My people do not leave things unfinished. If something or someone is deemed a threat, they ensure it is eliminated. No loose ends. No mistakes." Axel watched her carefully. "And you were a threat?" A pause. Then she nodded. He ran a hand through his hair. "All right, that raises about 100 new questions. What exactly did you do to piss them off so badly?" Sahira's lips pressed into a thin line. When she finally met his gaze, her silver eyes seemed darker in the dim light, filled with something heavy and old. "I was created for war," she said quietly. Axel went still. Sahira looked away, her jaw tightening. "My kind do not reproduce as yours do. We are engineered, designed for specific purposes. Some for labor, some for science, and some like me for combat. That was all that mattered. All I was meant to be." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications Axel wasn't sure he wanted to understand. "Created," he repeated slowly. "You mean manufactured, built, grown, trained from birth to kill." Her voice was flat, emotionless. "I was very good at it." Axel studied her face, looking for any hint of what she was feeling. But her expression remained closed off, guarded. "What changed?" he asked. For a long moment she didn't answer. Then so quietly he almost didn't hear it. "I started to question why." Inside the cabin, Sahira took in her surroundings with quiet calculation. Her posture was still tense, as if she expected an ambush at any moment. The place was small but functional, rough wooden walls, a stone fireplace, basic furniture that had seen better days. It smelled like old wood and dust, with a faint trace of something else. Something that felt safe. Axel set a first aid kit on the small table and gestured toward the couch. "Sit." She didn't move. He sighed. "Look, I get it. You don't trust me. But you're bleeding all over the place. And I'd rather not have to scrub violet blood out of my floorboards. So sit down and let me help you." A beat passed. Then, reluctantly, she lowered herself onto the couch. Axel knelt in front of her, snapping open the first aid kit. Up close, The damage was worse than he'd thought. Deep cuts ran along her shoulder and down her ribs, some still bleeding slowly, others beginning to close in ways that definitely weren't natural. He frowned. You said you heal fast. Sahira's gaze flickered to his hands as he pulled out antiseptic. And gauze. Faster than you. Not fast enough. Axel let out a low breath. Yeah, no kidding. He reached for her arm, but she flinched again. This time, he paused. I need to clean this, he said. Unless you'd rather risk infection. She exhaled slowly then, with visible effort, forced herself to relax. Axel worked quickly, but carefully, wiping away the blood and dirt. He expected her to wince, maybe even lash out, but she remained unnaturally still. Her skin was warm beneath his fingertips, warmer than any human should be. You're burning up, he muttered. I am healing. It requires energy. Does it always feel like this? Her lips pressed into a thin line. No. Axel didn't push, but he noted the way her jaw tightened, the way her shoulders locked up as if she didn't want to admit how weak she felt. He finished cleaning the wounds and reached for the bandages. All right, this might sting. I can handle it, Axel smirked. Figured. He wrapped the bandage around her shoulder first, securing it with practiced ease. His fingers brushed against her skin, and that same strange energy from before crackled. Between them. Sahira inhaled sharply. Axel froze. For a split second, it was like something clicked into place. A pulse of warmth spread from where they touched, like electricity but deeper, more real. It flowed between them, connecting them in a way that made no sense. Both of them pulled back at the same time. What is that? Sahira whispered, staring at her arm where he'd touched her. Axel shook his head, trying to clear the fog from his mind. I don't know. But even as he said it, he realized that wasn't entirely true. Whatever it was, it felt important. It felt like the beginning of something that would change everything. He just didn't know what yet. Wasn't just heat, it was something alive. Sahira's pupils dilated, slightly her breathing faltering, but then just as quickly she looked away, her expression shutting down. Axel forced himself to ignore it, finishing the bandages in silence when he pulled. Back she flexed her fingers slightly to testing the movement. Axel sat back on his heels. That should hold for now. You'll probably best if in the morning, she nodded, eyes still distant. Axel watched her for a moment before leaning against the table. You want to tell me who those guys were? Sahira didn't answer right away. She studied him instead, as if weighing something. Then finally, I was left behind. Axel felt something heavy settle in his chest. Left behind, not running from Sami and not escaping. Abandoned by who, he asked. Saha's gaze darkened. My own Thiwe. She said it cold. Final sent a chill through him. He'd expected some vague excuse. A lie, but this felt too raw to be anything but the truth. Axel ran a hand down his face. Sahira didn't react. He exhaled. All right, you don't have to tell me everything, but you should know whoever those guys were. They're not done looking for you. I know. Crossed his arms. So what's your plan? Sahira hesitated. Then finally, I don't have one. Something about the way she said it made Axel's chest tighten. She wasn't just lost, she was adrift. No home, no Elise, nothing. And somehow against every bit of common sense he had. Axel found himself saying, well, you do now. For the first time something flickered in her. Expression, not trust, not yet, but maybe, just maybe, a start. The fire crackled softly, its dim glow casting long shadows across the cabin walls. The scent of burning wood mixed with the lingering metallic tang of blood, though most of it had already been cleaned away. The air was thick with exhaustion, but neither of them slept. Sahira sat on the couch, the bandages Axel had wrapped around her shoulder and ribs stark against her deep blue skin. She had been silent for the past few minutes, staring at the fire as if waiting for it to reveal something she had lost. Axel leaned back against the kitchen counterarms, crossed over his chest, watching her. He had spent enough time around people to recognize someone carrying too much weight, and she looked like she was drowning under it, but he wasn't going to push, not yet. Instead, he exhaled through his nose and turned toward the stove, grabbing the old metal kettle and filling it with water from a bottle. "You drink tea?" he asked, setting it over. The flame Sahira blinked as if pulled from deep thought. "Teyiayu. No hot water, some dried leaves, nothing fancy. Thought you might want something warm." After all that, she hesitated, as if the concept was foreign to her, then quietly, "I do not know. If my body processes it the same way as yours." Axel shrugged. "Well, if you start glowing the sprouting extra limbs, I'll take that as a no." A flicker of something amusement maybe crossed her expression, but it was gone before he could be sure. The kettle heated in silence, filling the space with a low, steady whistle. Axel poured the tea into two mismatched mugs, setting one on the table in front of her. Before taking a seat across from her, Sahira eyed the cup for a moment before picking it up, cradling it between her palms, but not drinking. Axel took a sip of his own, letting the warmth settle in his chest. Then after a beat, he asked, "You gonna tell me your name?" She tined slightly. "Yaukno," he continued, tilting his head. "You never told me. Figured after everything, I should at least know what to call you." Sahira stared down into the cup. The firelight reflected off her irises, turning them into molten silver. Finally, she spoke. Sahira. Axel rolled the name around in his head, testing the way it felt. "Sahira," he repeated. "That's a good name." She glanced up at him. "It means nothing here." He shrugged. "Maybe not, but it still matters." Sahira studied him as if trying to understand something unspoken. Then after a long moment, in you. Axel smirked, tapping his fingers against his mug. "Axel," she tested it, speaking it slowly, deliberately. Axel, something about the way she said it made the room feel smaller, warmer. He had realized how close they had gotten until that moment. The space between them was thin, barely anything at all, and yet it felt like an ocean. Then before he could think better of it, Axel reached forward, his fingers brushing lightly against a wrist. Some strange pulse as before shot through him, a warmth not physical but something deeper, something that sank into his bones. Sahira inhaled sharply, her muscles going rigid, but she didn't pull away. Axel felt his own breath hitch. Sensation wasn't normal. It wasn't just the heat of touch or even attraction, it was something other, something he didn't have words for. And by the look in her eyes, she felt it too. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then almost reluctantly, Sahira pulled her hand back, curling it into her lap. Air between them shifted. The moment was gone, but it left something behind, lingering between them like an unfinished thought. Axel swallowed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Well, that was weird." Sahira didn't answer, but she didn't deny it either. The fire had burned low, casting flickering patterns of orange and shadow across the cabin walls outside. The wind whispered through the trees, rustling the leaves in slow, deliberate movements, as if the force itself was waiting inside. The air was thick, too quiet, too heavy with something unspoken. Axel sat at the small wooden table, one leg stretched out, his fingers drumming idly against the chipped surface. He wasn't looking at Sahira, not directly, but he could feel her there, still as stone, sitting on the couch, staring at the fire as if she could pull answers from the flames. He took a slow breath. "So you going to tell me now?" No reaction. Axel leaned back slightly, tilting his head toward her. "I think I earned an answer after everything, don't you?" Sahira finally moved, just barely. Her fingers twitched against the blanket draped over her lap, but her gaze remained locked on the fire for a long moment. He thought she might ignore him completely, then she spoke. Axel remained quiet, letting her speak on her own terms. "I was trained from the moment I could stand," she continued, her voice distant. "Taught to obey, taught to kill. We were given directives, missions, orders that were never to be questioned." Exhaled slowly, "And I followed them for a long time." Axel watched the way her hands curled against the fabric of the blanket, knuckles faintly tense. But then something changed, he guessed. Sahira gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. "There was a mission Target, we were sent to eliminate a colony of my own kindefectors, those who had refused their orders, who had chosen another their path. I did not hesitate. I follow my orders. A silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. But when the fighting was done, she continued, her voice quieter. Now there were survivors, not warriors. Not combatant children, the injured, those too weak to fight back. She swallowed, and the order was given to finish them. Axel felt his stomach tighten. He didn't say anything. He wasn't sure what he could say. Sahira's voice was like a blade cutting through the room. I refused. Axel let out a slow breath, and that was enough for them to turn on you in their eyes. Hesitation is the same as betrayal. She looked down at her hands. I was no longer one of them. I was an anomaly, and anomalies are. She hesitated, then finished. Corrected. Axel clenched his jaw. He had seen enough in his life to know what that meant. They tried to kill you. It wasn't a question. Sahira nodded. I was injured, outnumbered. I should have died there with the others, but I didn't. She exhaled, shaking her head slightly. Samo, I escaped, and that was their mistake. Axel narrowed his eyes. Because of they left you alive, because they let me think something about the way. She said. It sent a chill through him. I spent my life believing they were right. She murmured. That obedience was survival, that questioning was weakness. But when I saw what they were willing to do, what I had almost done. Her fingers curled into fists. I knew I could never go back. Axel leaned forward slightly. And now they're hunting you because you know too much. Because I exist, she corrected. Because I am proof that they control us. Not absolute. Axel let out a slow breath, leaning back against the chair. Sahira didn't respond for a long moment. Neither of them spoke. The fire crackled softly, the only sound in the cabin. Then Axel exhaled sharply, shaking his head. You know, I had a feeling you were mixed up in some bad. But this is next level. Sahira gave him a sidelong glance. If you wish to leave, I will not stop you. Axel scoffed. Yeah, and do what? Go back to pretending? I don't have a damn clue what's out there. Sorry, princess. But you ruined that for me. She itched a brow. Princess, he smirked. You got that whole regal and emotional naval thing going for you. Sahira exhaled, shaking her head. You were impossible. And yet here we are, Axel said, tilting his head. So what now? Sahira hesitated. Now I leave. Axel's smirk faded. That's not happening. You do not have a choice in this. Like hell I don't. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. Look, I get it. You think being around me is going to get me killed, but news flash, I make my own damn decision. So here is gay darkened. You do not understand. Then make me understand. Silence. Then quietly, they will not stop, not ever. And when they come, it will not be with weapons. You can fight. Axel clenched his jaw. Then we better start thinking of a way to fight back. Sahira stared at him for a long moment, and then almost reluctantly she whispered, You area fool. Axel smirked. Yeah. Well, I've been called worse. She exhaled slowly, as if resigning herself to something she didn't quite understand yet. Axel pushed himself to his feet and extended a hand. So are we doing this or what? Sahira hesitated. Then finally she reached out. Their hands met, that unendurable warmth pulse between them, stronger this time, as if something had settled between them, unspoken, but understood. Sahira held his gaze, and this time she didn't pull away. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, casting a dim flickering light across the small cabin. The air inside was still thick with the unspoken weight of everything that had passed between them outside. The wind howled through the trees, rattling the wooden panels and carrying with it the distant scent of rain. Sahira sat near the fire, her posture tense, fingers absently tracing the edge of the blanket Axel had given her. She had revealed more than she ever intended, more than she should have. The words still hung between them, impossible to take back. She had expected rejection, distrust, fear. Instead, Axel had stayed. Now here they were trapped in a silence neither of them seemed willing to break. Axel, sitting across from her, exhaled sharply and leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. His gaze flickered to her hand where it had rested against his earlier, where that strange warmth had passed between them. You know, he said finally, his voice low, almost thoughtful. Most people would have just lied. Sahira tilted her head slightly, regarding him with quiet curiosity. Yeah, he gestured vaguely. You could have told me anything, maid. Upper story kept the truth buried, but you didn't. She turned her gaze back to the fire. Lies serve no purpose when the truth is already a death sentence. Axel huffed a quiet laugh. That's one way to look at it. Silence stretched between them again, but this time it wasn't as heavy. Sahira shifted slightly, testing her movements. The pain had lessened, her body knitting itself back together. Butexhaustion still clung to her. Her healing was slower here, weaker in this atmosphere. She wasn't sure if it was the gravity, the air, or something else entirely. But she could feel it. This world fought against her, made her sluggish. She needed to be stronger. Axel was watching her, his gaze sharp, calculating or thinking about leaving again. Sahir stiffened. She didn't answer, but she didn't have to. Axel sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. We just went over this. Princess running off is a bad plan. Sahira frowned. Stop calling me, but then stop acting like a royal pain in my ass. Axel shot back, leaning back in his chair. You don't have a plan. You don't have supplies, and now I know for a fact that your people all over the hell is after you. Won't stop until you're dead. So tell me, what exactly is your grand strategy? Here Sahir, his fingers tightened around the blanket. I cannot stay. You do not understand the risk. Axel cut her off with a sharp lip. Try me. She hesitated, then soft F. I do not want her death to be my fault. Axel stilled for a long moment. He didn't say anything, then with quiet certainty said, I make my own choices. Sahira, she exhaled, shaking her head. You do not know what they are capable of. Then explain it to me. Sahira hesitated again, then turned to face him fully. They're not like you, Axel. Not like humans. They do not hesitate. They do not reason when they hunt. They do not stop until the threat is eliminated. Her voice was steady, but there was something beneath it, something cold, something tinged with memory. And I am their threat. Axel studied her carefully, then West-topped them. First Sahira let out a quiet breath, almost a laugh. But there was no humor in it. You believe you can fight them? Axel leaned forward. I believe that sitting around waiting to die is ashity. Alternative. Sahira looked at him, really looked at him. His expression was his jaw tight, his gaze unwavering. He wasn't afraid, not of her, not whatever came next. Was reckless, irrational, human, and something about it made her chest tighten. You should not trust me, she said softly. Axel gave her a lopsided smirk. Yeah. Well, I never was good at doing what I should. Another silence. But this time it wasn't uncomfortable. Sahira exhaled slowly, carefully. Then you should know what you're standing against. Axel sat up straighter. I'm listening. Sahira hesitated only a moment before she began. There are no names for them in your language, only concepts that do not fully capture what they are. She shifted slightly, as if choosing her words carefully. They were created as I was, but not for war. They were made for control. Axel frowned. Control. Sahira nodded. Their sole purpose is to ensure obedience, to eliminate deviations, to maintain theater. Our creators built. Her voice darkened to them. I'm not a person. I'm an error, and errors are erased. Axel exhaled slowly. Damn. Saha's gaze dropped briefly to her hands. I have evaded them longer than I should have. But they are patient. They adapt, and now that they know I am here, it is only a matter of time before they find me. Axel leaned back, running a hand through his hair. All right. So what's the move? Sahira blinked. Move. I'm not going to just sit here and wait to die, right? Sahira frowned. I do not know. Axel huffed. Not good enough. She itched a brow. You seem quite confident for someone who has never faced them. Axel shrugged. I've faced bad odds before. Haven't died yet. That does not mean you will win this fight. Doesn't mean I won't either. Sahira shook her head, something almost like disbelief flickering across her face. You are insufferable. Axel grinned. Yeah, I did that a lot. She exhaled long and slow, then finally said, then we must prepare. Axel's grin faded, slightly replaced by something more serious. He nodded. All right, where do we start? Sahira hesitated, then reached for Something at her waist, a small metallic device, barely the size of a coin, with unfamiliar symbols etched into its surface. She placed it on the table between them. Axel eyed it, wherewith it going to explode. Saha's lips twitched the closest thing to amusement had seen from her. No, she tapped the surface, and a soft, faintly glowing interface flickered to life. It is a locator. Axel's shoulders tensed. Meaning it is not active, she assured him, but it holds the last known coordinates of my pursuers. Axel's brows furrowed. So you know where they are? Sahira nodded. Yes, and if we are to survive, we must find them first. Axel let out a slow breath, staring at the glowing display. Then, with a small, almost excited smirk, he muttered, "No. We're talking." The early morning air was thick with the scent of damp earth and pine. A soft mist curled between the trees, veiling the world beyond. The cabin in an eerie stillness. The forest was waking, but Axel and Sahira had been up long before dawn, poring over their glowing display of the small device she had placed between them the night before. Coordinates pulsed faintly across its surface, shifting, recalibrating. A signal weak but persistent, tracing the last known location of her pursuers. Axel leaned forward, hands braced on the table, studying the flickering map. How accurate is this thing? Sahira, standing at his side, arms crossed, didn't look away from the device. Accurate enough. Their last transmission was sent from here. She tapped a glowing point on the display, roughly 50 mi south, near the river basin. Axel exhaled through his nose, rubbing a hand along his jaw. That's not far, Sahira nodded. No, it is not. They both knew what that meant. The hunters were closing in. Axel pushed off the table and grabbed his jacket from where it hung on the back of the chair. All right. Then we get there first. Sahira glanced at him, something unreadable flickering across her face. You were certain of this? He shot her a dry look. What you expected me to change my mind? Overnight, I expected you to consider the reality of the situation. Axel huffed. Reality severated. He pulled on his jacket and grabbed his pack from the floor. Besides, this is the best shot we've got. If we find them before they find us, we get the upper hand. Sahira hesitated, and for a moment he thought she might argue, but then slowly she nodded. Axel smirked. That's what I thought. Sahira rolled her eyes but didn't respond as she reached for her own gear, her movements quick and efficient. She was stronger today. He could see it in the way she carried herself, still cautious, still guarded, but no longer as fragile as she had been when he first found her bleeding in the dirt. She was healing, and something about it sent a strange sense of relief through him. They packed quickly, moving with silent coordination, and within minutes they were out the door, stepping into the cold embrace of the morning. Axel led the way to his truck, parked just beyond the tree line, hidden beneath a heavy tarp of branches and brush. He tossed their gear in the back and slid into the driver's seat, waiting as Sahira settled beside him. She sat stiffly, eyes scanning the tree-lined shoulders, tensile ways on guard. Axel started the engine, the familiar rumble breaking the morning's silence. You ever going to relax? Sahira didn't look at him, not while I'm buying hunted. Axel's smirk faded slightly. Fair enough. He shifted the truck in a gear and pulled onto the narrow dirt road leading away from the cabin. They had a long drive ahead. The miles passed in near silence, the only sounds the steady hum of the engine and the occasional rustle of wind through the trees. Axel glanced at Sahira out of the corner of his eye. She was staring out the window, her expression unreadable, but he could see the tension in her jaw, the way her fingers curled slightly against her thigh. She was thinking, calculating, probably considering a dozen different ways this could go wrong. Axel drummed his fingers against the steering wheel. So what's the plan when we get there? Sahira blinked, turning her gaze toward him. We assess the situation, determine their numbers, their resources, then we decide the best course of action. Axel snorted. Right? So in other words, we make it up as we go. Sahira exhaled through her nose. I prefer to call it adaptability. Axel grinned. Sounds a lot like winging it. She didn't smile, but the corners of her mouth twitched. Just slightly. Call what you wish. Axel chuckled, shaking his head. Fine, adaptability. As they drove on by bedtime time, they reached the river basin. The sun had risen high above the trees, casting sharp beams of light through the dense foliage. The terrain was rougher here, the road narrowing into a barely visible trail that forced Axel to slow the truck to a crawl. Sahira was already scanning the area, her posture rigid stoffer. Axel pulled off to the side, killing the engine for a moment. They sat in silence, listening. The river was close, heckled here the distant rush of water, the faint calls of birds hidden in the canopy. But there's something else too, something off. Sahira narrowed her eyes. They were here. Axel glanced at her user. She nodded once, gaze locked on the forest ahead. I can feel it. Axel didn't question it. He had learned by now that when Sahira felt something, she was usually right. They climbed out of that truck, moving, cautiously keeping to the trees, as they made their way toward the river. The ground was disturbed, subtle but noticeable tracks half erased by the wind and shifting earth, broken branches, the faintest impression of something heavy having been dragged through the dirt. Axel crouched, running his fingers along one of the marks in the soil. This was recent. Sahira knelt beside him. Less than a day. Axel's stomach tightened. They were close, too close. Sahira rose, mouthy eyes scanning the tree line. They moving. Axel stood beside her, toward us or away. Sahira hesitated. I do not know. Axel exhaled through his nose, greedily pressed forward, keeping to the shadows, tracking the signs left behind. The tension in Axel's could only grew as they moved. Something about this felt wrong. Then Sahira stopped suddenly, her entire body going rigid. Axel barely had time to react before she grabbed his arm, yanking him down behind the cover of a fallen log. He opened his mouth to question her, but she silenced him with a sharp look, eyes focused on something ahead. Axel followed her gaze. A figure stood in the clearing beyond the trees, tall, unmoving, dressed in armor that shimmered faintly in the filtered sunlight, its shape unnatural, its presence wrong. Axel's breath caught in his throat. The hunter had found them first. Saha's fingers tightened around his wrist, her voice barely a whisper. They know. We are here. The hunter stood motionless in the clearing, its armor catching the faint beams of light filtering through the trees. It didn't move, it didn't speak, but didn't have to. Sahira knew what it was. She could feel it. Axel's fingers twitched near his holster. His breath was steady, but she could hear the subtle shift in his stance, the readiness, the anticipation, opulence. They know we are here, she whispered. Yeah, Axel muttered, kind of goff at the hunter, turned its head slightly aslow. Deliberate motion, then in one smooth movement it raised its hand, fingers outstretched, palm facing them. A pulse of energy surged through the air. The ground beneath them cracked, trees groaned as invisible pressure rippled outward. The force hit Axel like a shockwave, knocking the breath from his lungs. Sahira reacted instantly, grabbing his arm and yanking him backward, just as the tree beside them imploded, bark and splinters bursting in all directions. Axel hit the ground hard, rolling into a crouch. His ears rang, his pulse pounded. Sahira, they not alone. She hissed. More figures emerged from the trees, silent shadows with glowing eyes, 3 no 4 surrounding them. Axel gritted his teeth. Great, now it's a party. Sahira didn't desert. She lunged, her body moved with lethal precision, closing the distance between her and the nearest hunter in a blur. She twisted duck beneath a strikeathon, drove her elbow into its torso. The armor barely dented, but the force sent figure staggering back. Axel didn't wait for an invitation. He drew his pistol in one fluid motion and fired. The first shot ricocheted off the hunter's chest plate, sparking uselessly. The second hit the exposed joint between its shoulder and neck, causing it to jerk sideways. All right, so they weren't invincible. Good to know. The hunter nearest to him moved fast, too fast before Axel could react. It was on him, knocking the gun from his hand. Axel barely had time to throw up his arms before it struck. The impact sent him sprawling, pain lancing through his ribs. He hit Fedet G, gasping as the hunter loomed over him, and Sahira was there. She moved like a blade, fluid and deadly. Her hand shot forward, fingers glowing faintly. and pressed against the hunter's chest. A pulse of blue light erupted outward. Their hunter convulsed, its armor cracked, its body seizing violently before it collapsed in a heap, smoke curling from beneath its plating. Axel blinked. Okaitha was new. Saheera didn't answer. She turned, eyes locking onto the remaining threats. One of the hunters raised its arm, energy crackling at its fingertips. Saheera moved. A blast of violet energy erupted from its palm. Axel didn't think. He shoved Saheera aside, the force of the blast grazing his shoulder. Pain flared sharp and blinding, but he ignored it. He rolled onto his back, grabbed his fallen pistol, and fired. The shot hit home right between the eyes. The impact sent it staggering before it crumpled to down. Last two hesitated, their glowing eyes flickering as if processing the shift in the fight. Axel grinned through the pain. Yeah, that's right. You should be scared. Then Saheera exhaled sharply and stepped forward, her hands ignited with a crackling glow, her body tensed like a storm about to break. The hunters didn't stand a chance. She was on them before they could react. Her movements, a blur of strikes, and raw power energy surged through her palms, breaking through their defenses, tearing through their armor. One fell, then the other, and just like that it was over. Silence settled over the clearing, broken only by the distant rush off the river. Axel groaned, pushing himself upright. That was fun, he muttered. Letten, never do it again. Saheera turned to him, breathing heavily, her gaze flickered to his shoulder where the blast had burned through fabric and flesh. You are injured. Axel shrugged. Not the worst. I've had so. His expression tightened. Without asking, she stepped forward and pressed her hand gently against his wound. A familiar warmth spread through his skin, up painful but strange, like a current running beneath his flesh. He inhaled sharply as the pain dulled the burned tissue, mending faster than it should have. When she pulled back, his skin was still raw but no longer bleeding. Axel blinked. Her. Saheera arched. Bro, you welcome? Axel chuckled. Yeah, thanks. They stood there for a long moment, the bodies of their fallen enemies surrounding them. Then Saheera exhaled, her shoulders relaxing for the first time in days. It is finished. Axel studied her carefully. They're not coming back, are they? She shook her head. No, their signal has been severed, their control ended. She looked up at him. I am free. Axel let that sink in. For so long she had been running, fighting, surviving, and now it was over. He let out a slow breath. So what now? Saheera hesitated, then softly, I do not know. Axel smirked. Well, that makes two of us. She watched him for a moment, something shifting in her gaze. Axel, he raised an eyebrow. Yeah. Saheera tilted her head slightly, and as if studying him. Then almost hesitantly she asked, why do you live this way? Axel frowned. What do you mean you are alone? She said simply, you could have a home, a family, yet you remain in isolation, waiting for something or someone. Axel's jaw tightened. He hadn't expected the question, hadn't expected her to be the one to ask it. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I guess I tried that once. His voice was quieter, now more measured. Didn't work out. Saheera didn't look away. What happened? Axel exhaled. I lost them. The words hung between them, heavy and unspoken. Saheera nodded slowly, as if she understood more than she was saying. And so you chose solitude? Axel gave her a lopsided grin, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. Something like that. A beat of silence then. Saheera stepped closer. You are not alone. Now Axel looked at her, really looked at Heron for the first time in a long time. He believed it. The forest around them was quiet. The threat was gone, and for the first time since this all began, neither of them had to run. Saheera turned toward the horizon, where the sky was beginning to lighten with the first traces of dawn. Axel followed her gaze, exhaling. Then, with a small smirk, he said, well, Princess, looks like we've got a whole damn future ahead of us. Saheera rolled her eyes, but there was something softer in them now, and as they walked away from the wreckage of the past toward whatever came next, she allowed herself just for a moment to believe in it, in freedom, in possibility. The days after the fight passed in quiet simplicity. No more running, no more looking over their shoulders, no more waking up to the possibility of death waiting outside the door. The realization took time to settle in for Sahira. She had spent her entire existence preparing for battle, for survival, for the certainty that peace was only an illusion, and yet she was standing at the edge of a world she had once never imagined for herself. Freedom. It was strange, she wasn't sure what to do with it. Axel had adapted quicker. Then again, he had always seemed at ease with rolling with whatever life threw at him. He still grumbled when he had to fix the truck, still cursed when the coffee was too weak, still had that stupid smirk every time she raised an eyebrow at him. But she noticed the difference too, the way his shoulders weren't quite as tense. The way he sat outside at night, staring at the stars instead of scanning the terrain for threats. The way he was here fully, completely, rather than waiting for something to pull him away. And now, days later, in the quiet of an early morning, Sahira watched him from the cabin's doorway as he stood near. The river sleeves rolled up, expression calm. It suited him. She stepped forward, bare feet pressing into the cool earth. You staring at nothing? Axel didn't turn. I'm thinking. Sahira crossed her arms. A dangerous pastime. Axel huffed a laugh. Yeah, well, can't be worse than getting chased by murder machines. She moved beside him, gazing at the slow-moving river. It is strange, she admitted. Axel glanced at what is Sahira exhaled, tilting her head toward the tree's silence. I have never known it before. Axel leaned against a nearby rock. You getting bored already? She looked at him, then her silver blue eyes searching his face. No, something shifted in the air between them, something that had been growing since the first night in the cabin. Since the first moment they had trusted each other enough to fight side by side. Axel held her gaze. So what now? Sahira hesitated, not because she didn't know the answer, but because it was still unfamiliar to say aloud. Then softly, I stay. Axel stilled. Sahar's fingers twitched at her side. Then she stepped closer, closing the distance between them. If I leave, I will only be searching for something I've already found. Axel's throat bobbed, his voice quieter than usual. Yeah, Sahira nodded. Yes. The wind stirred between them, but neither of them moved then. Axel exhaled, shaking his head with the smallest smirk. You always this dramatic? Sahira arched a brow. You're the one who stares at rivers to think. Axel chuckled, but it faded as his gaze lingered on her, slowly, deliberately. He reached up, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers skimmed against her skin, and she felt it again, that same warmth, that strange pull. But now it wasn't unexpected. Now she welcomed it. Axel's voice was barely above a whisper. Usual about this. Sahira leaned in, her breath warm against his skin. Yes. Then she kissed him. It was slow, unhurried, nothing like the battles they had fought, nothing like the chaos they had survived. It was steady, grounding, the kind of moment that spoke of choices made of something solid beneath uncertainty. Axel sighed against her lips, his hand settling at her waist, pulling her just a little closer, as if to make sure she was real. When they finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. You know, this means you're stuck with me now, right? Sahira smirked. Yes. She pressed a palm against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heart beneath her fingers. He wasn't running, and neither was she. For the first time, the future wasn't a battlefield, it was theirs.